Welcome to Creative Courage Chats, a search for a new understanding of creativity and problem solving. I'm Alex Raffi. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Creative Courage Chats. I'm here with Aviva Gordon, a very, very good friend of mine. I'm very pleased to be talking to her. It's been too long. This situation we're in has kind of kept me away from a lot of very good friends, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. She's an attorney, but why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about who you are and Aviva.
So first, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me. And I'm like a whole bunch of things all at the same time, right? Like professionally, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a wife and I'm a mom and I'm, a human being who lives in our community, who tries to make a difference where I can. And, sometimes all of those different parts of me work in tandem, and other parts, I end up being sort of like a self-cannibal. So that's who I am. I'm a cannibal.
Good. I knew it was gonna lead us somewhere peculiar, and that's great. That's why I love you. That's why this is great. And okay, so some people just out of you're my first lawyer I spoke to, and I say attorney, but I don't know, lawyer.
Whatever. There's a difference, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna say lawyer. So because you said lawyer. So anyway, This talk is about creativity. So for people who are maybe seeing this for the very first time, why would a guy talking about creativity? Why isn't he talking about artists or art? And why is he talking to a lawyer? Because, think about it. You need to be creative to find solutions to things and to find pathways that lead you in certain directions. We are informed by our education of what we've been taught and what we've experienced in life. And attorneys are right up there in the higher echelon of always trying to discover ways of interpreting situations, and they fit within the scope of the law. And sometimes they have to challenge laws that have eventually become maybe not as just as we once thought. And there's a lot of aspects of this that are really important. And I just think it's what I want to ask you about. I think of course it's creativity, because your mind has to work creatively on how you approach problems. But what made you want to follow this career, I guess, is my first question. I've never actually asked you this. I don't know, I've asked you a lot of things, but describe young Aviva, what was it that sparked? I have a feeling it's the movie, though. Maybe I have asked you about this. Right?
Yes and no, right? So It is a movie, which, spoiler alert, it's To Kill a Mockingbird, and it is actually one single line in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, which was equally breathtaking in the movie. And it's the line, stand up, Miss Jean Louise, your father is passing. And it's when Atticus Finch had finished his closing argument in the trial, which, if anybody is seeing or listening to this who has not read the book or seen the movie, shut us off right now and go do both of those things. But it's this incredible story on many, many levels, but that part of a lawyer who really does take this tremendous amount of integrity and moral courage, knowing that what he is doing in that moment is not going to make a difference, but he does it anyway. Mm-hmm. So that most certainly was transformative. But the reason I think that I became a lawyer ultimately is because I can't be an artist. I don't have artistic talent, right? So I can't dance, I can't sing, I can't paint, I can't do any of those things. And I still had to find a way to feed myself. So that is sort of how I went down this path. No,
that's not good.
Okay, in all sincerity, right?
Yeah.
So
okay. Let's go there.
I was a political science major in college and had a tremendous opportunity to be an intern for Congressman Morris Udall, who was just an absolute institution in Arizona. And for people who are probably too old to really access having, watching a a webcast. He ran for president in 1976, and wrote this great book. Once again, another great book that you should read if you haven't, which is Too Funny to Be President. That's the name of his book, because he was a character in every possible way, but an institution and a tremendously wise man. So I interned for him. And it was between my freshman and sophomore year, that was between my sophomore and junior years of college. And I thought that I wanted to go into politics, is what I thought I wanted to do. So when I had a meeting with the congressman, and he was an intimidating sort of just being, right? Because of who and what he was. Right. So he leans back, puts his hands on his belly a little bit, says, "So, young lady, what is it you think you want to do with your life?" And I said, "Well, Congressman, I want to go into politics. I think that this is really the place for me." And I spoke very, very quickly, and I was very nervous, and I probably sounded a little like Minnie Mouse while I was doing it. And he said, "You need to go to law school." And I said, "Congressman, I don't want to be a lawyer. That's not what I want to do." And he said, again, his hands on his belly, leaning back, "Young lady, if you want to be involved with anything with the creation of laws, you need to know how they affect people and how to interpret them. And law school will teach you that." And so I went back to school, and I went through my junior year of college and starting my senior year of college, and recognizing that with a political science degree, I was qualified to do nothing. So I applied for law school, and I went to law school. And while I was in law school, still, I started still with the same intention about politics, but then really just, in as much passion as I can have, right, passionately fell in love with the practice of law, with every last bit of it, with what, where it is that, you talk about creativity, and at least for artists, one would hope that creativity is boundless, right? That there are no parameters within which an artist needs to be able to express his or her creativity. Right. But what the law does is creates boundaries, right? And so sometimes those boundaries are porous and need to be moved or changed. And sometimes they help to maintain whatever is that sort of fabric of our society. And, to the extent that you can talk about creativity within the practice of law, that's really where it is to be able to understand boundaries, for me to help clients negotiate where the boundaries should stop where they're doing, where they should push on those boundaries, or where those boundaries should cause them to rethink what they want to do and, turn one way or the other in relation to those boundaries.
That's such a great description of how to view law from the perspective of somebody who's maybe considering doing it. We've already gotten to the rewind moment that I always get to towards the end of this thing. I seriously, listen to her explain that one more time if you're curious, because that's such a beautiful, actually, way of describing something that doesn't get the credit that it deserves on being a creative, creative job description, of something, of us using. Everybody knows you have to be smart to be a lawyer, and you have to be knowledgeable, but it's not, there's a difference between IQ and CQ, and you need data, you need to understand things. There's a lot of studying, a lot of reading, but the content that you're taking, you have to now apply it and use that information to help guide you. And that's why it's a difficult job, but boy, it must be pretty rewarding when you discover a pathway that is going to take you somewhere interesting, somewhere that's going to really challenge people into really thinking things in a new way, which I imagine has happened to you a few times, right?
It has. And right. I'm just, I'm just a dork about it. There's no other way for me to say it, because I do find so much beauty in the law, right? I find beauty in that, there are rules for something, and you need to be able to sometimes, go through the sort of mystery solving part of it. Is this action within or outside of the rules, right? And it's never something that is, apparent on a superficial level, at least not for good lawyers, right? A good lawyer is going to try to find something a little bit deeper for it under any circumstance. So, one of the areas that I love the most is really the words that govern what somebody can or cannot do. So whether that's words in a statute, or whether that's words in a contract, or, whatever those parameters may be, to really dig into what do the words mean, and how is it that the words either enable or prohibit certain conduct, right? And, the other thing that I think is really just amazing about the law is it is living and breathing, right? There have been, and we can talk about it, I think, in almost any context that you want to, there are changes and evolutions that come through sometimes the statutory process, but more often the judicial process. And that does take, and I want to sort of go on the second part of your nomenclature, and that is the courageous part, right? It does take courage for some of those sort of big ticket societal issues to be able to say, this is how we've always done it, and this is why we have always done it. But how and why we have always done it has evolved into something different. And what we have done in the past and what seemed to work in the past, it doesn't anymore. And in the same way that, ideally humanity evolves and learns from, where there have been challenges or fissures or mistakes, the law is part of that too. And in some ways, the law leads sort of human behavior, right? And in other ways, the law follows human behavior. So, on the following side, I can tell you right now, I think the biggest challenge, not the biggest challenge, but a very big challenge where the law is behind society is in the area of technology, right? So there are all sorts of emerging technologies that occur, and the law is really playing catch up on so many of those things, whether it be social media, or whether it be blockchain technology, or whether it be really any other sort of technological aspect that affects our worlds. So we are by far lagging in that. But from a societal standpoint, and I don't necessarily, unless you want to talk about some of the sort of rifts that we have in society right now, but the first step for change on those typically has been changes in law. So you talk about Jim Crow laws, for example, right? Those were real laws that were on the books. And it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act, which is a law, and then interpretations of the Civil Rights Act by lower courts as well as the United States Supreme Court, that said this kind of limitation, conduct, behavior, it's not okay. I mean, it said so in probably way more words than that, but essentially it's not okay. Now, the laws changed relatively quickly, so to speak, in that time frame, if you talk about it, but the sort of human behavior falls way slower than that. So if you look at, for example, the time frame from 1865 to 1965, right? So end of the Civil War to really sort of the true, at least from a legal standpoint, beginning of civil rights movement, right? Mm-hmm. Where there were passages of the Voting Rights Act and some of the other Civil Rights Act, and even 10 years before that with Board versus Board of Education, Brown versus Board of Education, pardon me. So all of those things were laws, whether it be from a statutory standpoint or judicial standpoint, that said that discrimination is not okay and it is not legal, right? But here we are now, in 2020. So take that period of 1965 to now 2020, and as a people, we are so far away from catching up, right? But the law has led the way on that.
Mm-hmm. This is like exactly what I was thinking this was going to go. I'm very pleased with how this is going.
I'm always happy to make you happy, man. Yeah, that just does it for me.
I love this. And, this reminds me a little bit of a chat I had with a police officer recently, where this profession, and I know there's baggage that comes through society's impression of lawyers, and there's always the jokes of lawyers and everything. But the law,
which, by the way, none of them are funny. Not a single one of those jokes are funny. Not a single one. But go ahead.
I don't know. Maybe this
not a single one. Not a single one.
Okay, we're not going to tell any of those jokes. But it is based on doing right for people. It is based on, the core of it is based on doing the right thing, I think. And if not at first, because some laws are unjust, of course, but time eventually tries to fix that as we move forward and tries to find it. And then it is society's expectation that actually steers that in that direction, I know. But I think that is to, at least, you're doing best for the community or for your client or whoever it is. You're trying to find whoever you represent, you're trying to do the best for them. And I know that sometimes that's a difficult thing. And there's this honor, I think, in this profession that is unique in the sense that I'm always impressed with lawyers that have to represent people that are maybe clearly not good people, but they have a right to have legal representation. And there are some lawyers that step up, even though it's so unpopular. And they know they're going to be looked, because people are very simple in how they view things. But for this to work, for this system to work, we need for everyone to fall into these categories, right? And that's very, I imagine, super difficult. But also there's some nobility, even representing a serial killer, okay? The serial killer needs representation for the law to work. You can't just have them go into you know what I mean? And
sure.
Somebody had to represent them at some point. I imagine Charles Manson had a lawyer.
Charles Manson had a team of lawyers. Yep.
Right. So, and even though they maybe in their heads believed he was guilty, it's their job to present the best arguments. The opposing side, being just and right, should win. But everybody should be working forward in the same amount, right? I mean,
So I mean, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I'm talking a little bit sort of more metaphoric about this, but my understanding from my colleagues who do practice criminal law is that what is most important to them is the preservation of the process. Right. And the protections, and the difference between a state that is based on laws and a lawless state is having that kind of framework and those protections that are there.
Right.
So if I can to sort of take this to a different kind of place, and that is, for example, with First Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. So the First Amendment unequivocally protects speech. And it's really easy to say that, speech that is good and beneficial and flowery should be protected. But that's not what the purpose of the First Amendment is. The purpose of the First Amendment is that I can say the most outrageous, offensive, disgusting, hurtful thing to you, about you, scream it from some tower, right? And that's protected. And the reason that is just as amazing and beautiful as it is because I don't want you or somebody else, some other human being, making a decision as to whether what I say is right, wrong, beautiful, hurtful, right?
Mhm.
So having the protection that's there and having the protections that are there for criminal defendants is so much more about the process and preserving, you know, the abilities that we have rather than an individual action, person, or speech.
Right.
And, you know, there are all of these debates, probably more so pre-COVID in a different way, but even now, you know, in these days of COVID, sort of on, you know, internet communication, right, is to, can I say something horrible and offensive, and is that protected? Now, that's different from should I say it, right?
Right.
Should I say something horrible and offensive? Probably not, right? But, you know, I could say to you, you know what, Alex, the red that's in your background, that makes me think about red velvet cake, okay? Because I always think about cake, by the way. And you may say, this does not represent red velvet cake. That, oh, great, thank you. Now you've completely screwed up my whole thing. Okay, now I'm done. I just like have to
No,
be done.
I'm sorry.
Can I have the red back,
Yes,
please?
you can.
Thank you. And you could say that the red represents, you know, your pulse and the blood pressing through your veins, right? And you could be materially offended by my belittling it that it looks like cake, right?
Right.
But your viewpoint about what I say should not stop me from saying it.
Right.
And so whether it's on college campuses or whether it's on what is now our new sort of virtual public square, which is the internet, you know, we should be able to, again, whether we should and whether we can are two very different things, right? But I should be able to scream at the top of my lungs whatever is the most offensive, so that that protects you from being able to say whatever you want to say at the top of your lungs.
And this is incredibly important right now. And I don't think that people are thinking of this, that in terms of the Constitution, even in terms of our system of government, I know we have two opposing sides that are battling constantly, and it's just a war going on. But everybody needs to remember the system isn't designed to be pretty. It's designed to be effective. It's designed to create, you know, it's a system of sure, it's a government is a system of trying to control things to an extent so that we can survive and move forward, giving people the freedom to feel what they want, which is asking a lot. You're asking a lot to give people freedom and to also constrain them in some ways sometimes. And it's that incredible experiment. And right now it's being tested more than it's been tested in a long time. And it's very important for people to understand, like what you're saying is the, I forgot what your wording was, but we have to protect the system that we have. We have to keep that in mind on how we move forward. There are people that you don't like what they're saying, but
Sure.
guess what? They have a right to say it.
And
you don't have to like it, but
right.
you got to let them say it.
And you do not want to stop them from saying it, because someday there will be people who do not like what you're saying.
Right.
And you do not, you know, you want for the First Amendment to be a shield and not a sword, right? And that shield should protect the exchange of ideas, good, bad, ugly, pretty. It should protect those ideas. It should not be used as a sword to stop somebody from saying something that is incredibly unpopular, ugly, or offensive. Again, a difference between, you know, can and should.
Right.
But from a legal standpoint, you know, anytime that there are conversations about limiting what somebody says or how they say it or where they say it or when they say it, it causes me just complete and utter anxiety, because it's not that, if the pendulum swings the opposite way, right,
Mm-hmm.
then your abilities then to say what is okay on this side of the pendulum may no longer be okay. And I think that, democracy is a long game. And we
Very, very long.
cannot, well, it is a very long game.
Yeah.
And right, that process, those procedures, the rule book, right? That's really what needs to endure, because the pendulum will swing back and forth, and it has, for 250 years, right? So, and I think that, at least for our country, it was born of a physical, bloody, death-entailed revolution, right? And did not end quietly or peacefully, or even, on a short period of time. And is the system perfect? Absolutely not. And it never will be, because no system is perfect. If you want to have, perfect, then you should be a dictator of your own fiefdom, and then it will be perfect for you and nobody else, right? And given the varying experiences of a very large country, at some point, somebody is going to feel like they're on the top, and somebody else, by definition, is going to feel like not necessarily they're on the bottom, but they're not quite on top, right? And, looking at it from a longer lens, I think, helps to hopefully neutralize some of the vitriol that we see from both sides. Because quite frankly, and I don't want to have necessarily a political conversation, but quite frankly, anybody standing up and saying, I am right about everything and you are wrong about everything, that's not a debate. That's not a conversation. And quite frankly, it's not productive to solve a single problem.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like my little outburst I did about growing up. I don't know if you saw that on social media, but I wrote about that. It's time to grow up. It's time to realize that we have to live together after this. And we have to figure this out going forward, because the people that you are opposing are not going to just up and disappear. They are going to be there after whatever happens in November, no matter what happens. So the opposing side has to learn how to, you don't have to believe in it. You don't even have to respect the opinion, but you do have to let it live. I mean, in some way, unless it's dangerous, unless it's threatening, as long as it's within the laws that we've kind of created. If the person believes whatever the hell they want to believe, that's their right to believe the thing that they believe. This is what we live in. This is America now. So, I mean, so this is the system we've created. It's not the pretty. Sometimes it gets very, very ugly. And like you said, I mean, it's born of bloodshed but at the end of the day, it's kind of still is the best system out there in terms of allowing as much freedom that is possible in the world for people, for a community, or for a society of people, right? I don't know. Like I said, we don't want to get too far into the politics.
Yeah, sorry.
So let's go ahead and I want to ask one other thing about your story going forward. First of all, it's so obvious. I love how you describe things, and how you share your thoughts. You're very thoughtful, and you don't leave a lot of room for questions after you're done, because I understand
it's the mic drop.
I understand everything, and it's almost like you anticipate like one statement, and you start to anticipate what people might not understand, and then you start filling that gap, and then you move and you fill that gap. And I think that has a lot to do with what you do. I think when you're arguing your points, you're anticipating the other side's view, and it's not. I think it's really impressive, and I think it's commendable. And I think more people started thinking in those terms when they're trying to share their opinions. It kind of forces the other side to try to think broader, and we don't have to like have these like single sentence responses, or or things, where we can have real discussions and find answers. But that's just something I was just thinking. But anyway, when you were describing, I'm sorry, what was the gentleman's name again that you were interning for?
Oh, Congressman Mo Udall.
Okay. So I thought that this is interesting because I think it's really relevant too for people that are in positions sometimes where you're working with young people who admire you or look up to you. He saw something in you there was some serious potential, and his advice to you was changed your life. And I think that that's something that we need to think about as far as people that are in positions sometimes when we're talking to young people or being looked up to by a young person. First of all, acknowledge the fact that and take the responsibility, because that is such a gift for someone to want to learn from you. And if we don't take advantage of that and utilize that and help, like he helped you to create this truly a moment of discovery for you, I think that it's such a wasted opportunity. And I just think that's an important thing to say out loud for anybody. I know you've given me advice on things in the past, and it's funny because you can either be incredibly hilarious in how you approach a topic, but then you have this moment of seriousness that you kind of take sometimes, and then you give these really thoughtful advice about it. There's very few times you're in between. You're you go very funny, or you're having fun with the thing, or you go serious and thoughtful and explaining a thing that needs to be said. But I don't know. I don't know if that's a question. I don't think it is, but I think it's observation that I think is important.
So can I say a couple of things? First, in terms of the way that I think that I have been trained to communicate, it's, lawyers who are good at what they do are persuasive in their communication. And in order to be persuasive in your communication, you need to go to whomever your audience may be, whether it be one person or 1,000 people, right? You need to know, where their starting point is. And you're never going to know definitively, right? But you need to have some understanding. And I think that the best lawyers truly are the most empathetic lawyers, so that they can read what it is and they can feel what it is that somebody else, where the pain or pleasure point may be, to be able to minimize the pain and maximize the pleasure based upon the way that the presentation is given of, whatever it is that has to be. So I don't know that there's a process that goes through my head to say, oh, I think Alex is going to think about it this way, so let me try to anticipate what he's going to say.
Right.
But the truth is, I know you, and I have a sense of sort of where you come from at problem solving. And you and I may approach things vastly differently, and we may even come to vastly different conclusions. But I think being able to be empathetic to where you come from helps that much more for us to be able to find some common ground about it. Mm-hmm. For me to be able to persuade you about whatever it may be, right? So I think that the ability to understand persuasive language and persuasive reasoning, I think that's enormous for anybody who is ever going to talk. And no matter what you do, if you're ever going to talk, if you're going to be in marketing, if you're going to be in sales, if you're going to be in law, if you're going to be on a construction site, if you're going to be sitting behind a keyboard, it is a skill that is beneficial for whatever you're going to do. And I think it can be a learned skill. Empathy, I think, can be learned, and I think that persuasion is something that goes hand in hand with that. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point that I wanted to make was when you were talking about Congressman Udall, and when you were talking about sort of what our responsibilities are for other people. And I don't think it's necessarily, older, younger, more experienced, less
Right.
experienced, because
Right.
certainly there is room for me to learn and grow from interaction with anybody or everybody, right?
Sure. Sure.
But I think that, you know, being open to both leading and learning is really, really important. And I think, you know, at least what I try to do is, as much as I can sort of sit back and say, you know, Alex, here's what I think you ought to do, and I think that I can guide your life in every possible way, which, by the way, I can guide your life in every possible way.
It's good to know.
Yeah. Um,
I'll keep that
but
in my back pocket.
excellent. But it's, I think, the example that we give and that we show, right? So I am a woman of a certain age, where when I went to law school, women only represented about a third of law students.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I walked, and I don't want this necessarily to be a gendered conversation, but I know that I walked on roads that were paved by people before me.
Sure.
And in so doing, I haven't had a responsibility of continuing to pave those roads. And it's not just what, you know, the advice that I can give to somebody who is younger or less experienced, but I think it's also, you know, making sure that what I do is seen, and then also making sure that what other people do is seen. And
Mm.
I think what you are doing through this webcast is amazing, because that is precisely what you are doing. You are putting a spotlight on people that maybe are not seen, or maybe not seen to the greatest, or at the greatest depth that you are showing them.
Mm.
And what that does is, you know, first of all, it's inspirational to me, but then I'm hopeful that it's inspirational to others to put a light on those around them, right? To say, hey, this person is doing good work, interesting work, creative work, whatever adjective that you want for that, because sometimes I think we end up getting so siloed in what we're doing. And I think this is particularly true when we are doing so many things remotely or virtually,
Right.
that we are missing out on the opportunity to highlight what other people do and how other people make whatever space they are in, make it better.
That's I appreciate that, and I agree with everything you're saying. This is I've probably spoken the least in this interview.
Sorry. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, that's not something to be sorry about. It's because I got nothing to add. I mean, it's so good. So now that's totally insulting everybody else I interviewed. No, but you know, I'm just teasing. But anyway, regardless, I think that it's really intriguing, and I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at it, and I do think it's important. The empathy thing, I think, is really important in how we approach everything. And I was just having a conversation today with a market researcher friend of mine, and we had some coffee and we were chatting, social distancing, of course.
Of course.
And we were chatting about things, and I was kind of describing, you know, in my situation, in my world, in marketing, um, I've gotten to a particular level where I really trust my intuition with people, and I don't. I like going into things without any preconceptions or ideas, and a lot of times especially with a new client, I don't like to look at what's out there about them because that was designed by someone else. I like to get my content from them directly through questions and then form an opinion. And it's interesting because there's moments when you do that. See, I do have a team of people who do the research that are with me. So it helps. It's not like we're just doing this. But my role personally is to find these things that are worth building on. And it's funny because I found that, and you know, this might happen. I don't know. This might happen with you as well. So I'll describe this scenario when you're in court or something, and you're arguing a point, is when you're having a discussion and the person says something and it makes you feel something personal. You're not sure where that feeling came from, but it's there and it's real. So what I do is I connect that feeling to something in my life that's happened to me. And there's been moments where in a break, I'll just say, can I share a story? And I'll start telling the story that's connected to that feeling without knowing where I'm going. But I know that somehow this story might actually reveal the reason I felt that. I won't know why, but in the telling of the story, I'm able to make the connection between what I'm hearing and what it is I felt. Now, that takes a while to do that, and a lot of people don't have the courage to jump in and do that, but this is what I do, and this is how I trust my intuition and I trust that feeling, that it's going to lead me where it needs to go. And I think that sometimes that's something that we all have that feeling. Like we'll be hearing or seeing something, and we'll feel this tinge, but we can't define it, so we either ignore it or we just hold it inside. But if you were to explore that thing and you actually trust yourself and move forward, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities. So I'm wondering if something like that happens with you sometimes when you have these feelings, because you have all this knowledge of the law that you carry with you that probably becomes your armor in a sense, that you're prepared. You're armed with this, and you have a thing that you notice and feel, and you're not exactly sure where it is, but you find yourself in court, right in front of a judge, just going off the note, not using the notes, just going off the cuff, and then going and arguing a point, trusting that you will eventually find an answer. I know this is a weird question to ask you. I'm just
No,
totally curious.
so the answer is yes and no,
Oh.
which is a typical lawyer answer, by the way. um, so this is going to sound horrible, but when I'm arguing in court, I don't think that I feel anything. And the reason that I say that is that I really have to rely upon the objectivity of the facts and arguments that I'm making, right?
That makes sense.
So, yeah. And so when I'm arguing in court, it's not about me. I am advocating on behalf of a client. So I think for the most part, my feelings about something are irrelevant. And I sort of check that at the door. Otherwise, there have been times that I have argued on, points on behalf of clients where I think it may not necessarily from a sort of macro level be the right thing, but for that particular moment, it's the right thing. So I leave sort of the part of me that is individual Aviva back behind,
Right.
attorney Aviva Gordon, right?
That actually doesn't sound horrible. That sounds like you're respecting the client because it's all about them at the moment, which it should be.
And then in terms of whether I go off the cuff, so I think this is where empathy does come in, right? So oftentimes arguing in court, not oftentimes, always, there's some degree of exchange, right? So one lawyer gets up and advocates his or her position. Sometimes there's an exchange with the judge. And then the other lawyer gets up and advocates his or her position, and sometimes there's an exchange with the judge. But if you don't listen to your adversary's arguments, and most importantly, if you don't listen to the commentary from the judge, then you are missing every possible opportunity for your argument. Because if somebody's asking questions, that gives you an insight into how they are approaching what is in front of them. So when I prepare for court, I prepare out what it is that I'm going to say. I never write out full sentences. It's all just bullet points, because I can't do that, because if I had full sentences, I would just stand there and read, and that's not
Right.
a very effective way of doing things. But there is most certainly some maneuvering that happens with that, or some change that happens with that, depending upon what else is happening in that circumstance. So even though I said that, my emotions are not a part of it, it is also not robotic, because it can't be. So it is, I think to be successful at it, you do need to have the ability to adapt what your position is, to be able to, and I think we're coming sort of full circle on this, to be able to persuade the judge in that circumstance to see the law and the facts that is in a way that is most beneficial for the position that for which you're advocating. So, but I don't know that that's emotional engagement. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. Yeah, no, it totally does. And yeah, it's coming from a different perspective. Yeah, because it's different. I mean, I'm talking about marketing. You're talking about, things that are,
Yeah, but you know what? They're not all that different in that in both cases, you are trying to get somebody to see, feel, or do something,
right.
right? I mean, that you are ultimately trying to move somebody's perspective, viewpoint, position, or action based upon what you're doing. So it's not all that different. I think the tools are, can be very, very different, but I don't think that the actual, effect of what you do is all that different from what I do. It's just different tools.
Right. So one other thing that popped into my head I wanted to mention is I've known you for a while here, for a long time, and I've one of the things that I love about you is that you are a warrior, and you've always been like that. You have a gigantic heart. You're incredibly funny and just charming as hell. But I know that push comes to shove, I want you in my corner for sure. And it's funny because I'm going to tell this particular story. I'm not going to give out names, but I did find myself talking to a couple of attorneys, men. You know this story, and
I do.
I think it's hilarious because we got to talking about them and what they do and everything, and I mentioned you because I knew you so well. I go, I know, I'm a good friends with Aviva Gordon. They go, ooh. I'll never forget that ooh. And I go, what, you know her? And she goes, oh yeah. I go, you've gone against her in court before. And they go, yep, she's tough. I go, how did it turn out? And he goes, yeah, we didn't make it. I love that. I love that so much. And part of the reason why I wanted to mention this is because although we're in 2020, there's still these, things going on, whether they're sexist or discriminatory or whatever. And I think that it's important to see certain people as role models. I think you fit into that category of somebody who can be tough and be strong and be good at what they do, but still have their own identity and not have to compromise. And I think sometimes in society, we kind of feel like we have to take particular roles and always fit this particular role and relinquish other roles. But there's ways of doing these things. Am I making any sense to you right now, what I'm saying? I think
Well, yeah, I mean, I got a little hung up on you calling me a role model, which you knew would make me uncomfortable, and it did. So, but yes, I think that that's true. I think that, and part of it is because I've been doing this as long as I have, that I can, at the end of the day, go back to being me, right? And have the confidence to be able to do that. And I think that, I mean, if you would have met me 25 years ago, I don't know that necessarily I was at that same level of confidence just because I've done this for as long as I have. And I think that at the beginning of this conversation, you asked what, like young girl Aviva would have been or done or whatever. And I think it's not a fair question. And the reason that I say that is, Aviva at 12 is somebody that I wouldn't recognize and she wouldn't recognize me. And all of that is from a lifetime worth of experience. And, those experiences, good and bad, it doesn't, in retrospect, it doesn't matter if they were good or bad experiences. They are who created the person that I am now. And, being true to who I am and being true to, my family and the people whom I love and my community, that to me is paramount over anything else. And that's, when I go to bed at night, that's the person that I have to be. And the rest of it, becomes less important, I think. And, if there is anybody who is listening who is, sort of at a crossroads, God, just embrace the crossroad. Embrace what that is, because the process that you're going through, whether it's personal or professional or academic or whatever it may be, that's going to create the person that you are tomorrow. That coming through that is really what builds who you are and the character of who you are. And as much as it could be painful or confusing or frightening, that's where the good stuff comes from. And I mean, I can tell you, I've won a lot of cases. I've won a lot of cases. I don't remember a whole lot about any of them.
Yeah.
I can tell you in painful detail the times when I didn't win and what it was that I gained from that. And that's true, on a personal level as well, right? There have been times that I have said or done or acted in a way that, now I would think is anywhere from just uncomfortable to abhorrent, right? And I am hopeful that for those negative things that I don't repeat them. But for going through that, I couldn't get to be the person that I am now.
Right.
Sorry, that was way, way too philosophical. Sorry.
No, man, you haven't watched this clearly. This is where we go with. This is where these chats go. This is fine. This is what I'm looking for. But I will slightly push back on you just because I do that, and I'm going to try really
all the
hard.
time.
I'm going to try.
And by the way, you've told me I'm wrong twice.
Twice, 2 times. You were totally, completely wrong twice, but it's okay. It's all right. No, don't beat yourself up over it.
Clearly, I haven't let go of that. So
no, you haven't. You don't hear that very often, clearly. But I'm going to try really hard to say this without complimenting you because I know you don't like that. But the pushback is just that, yes, your experience gives you the confidence that makes you who you are. I agree 100% with that. The thing is, though, that even as the youngest person you are, there is something in you. I believe this. I believe that there's something in you. And when you know what it is because it makes you feel proud. Like when you feel proud of something, that's deep part of you are. When you see somebody do something and you think, wow, that's great. All you are is it's because it's connecting with something that's already inside you. When you see Atticus calmly putting the papers back into his briefcase and all these people are observing him. And when he gets ready to turn around, all those people stood up. And then he tells Scout, stand up. It's your dad that, your dad's passing. He doesn't know that they're doing this. He doesn't even see them. They're up on the top balcony because they weren't allowed down in this thing. There's this quiet pride they had in the work that's being done. And when you saw that, you were moved by that. You were moved because he was doing something good for the right reasons and not for himself, because it was the right thing to do. And he was working within a system that wasn't helping him at all, but he was still fighting for the right thing to do. Something within that is part of who you are. That's something that moved you. And you've carried that your whole life and still there today. And I've known you a while and we've been around and I've seen that part of you come out every once in a while, whether it's through a conversation or through an incident that happened. You've always had that core about you, this sensible, righteous ideal that this is how it's tough, but this is how things need to be. And there's this kind of realism that it's hard to describe. But anyway, I'm using you as an example again to anybody watching. Anybody watching this, there are things that move us and things that we appreciate. You have to understand that you're not just experiencing things they're not happening to you. You're connecting with them because they're part of who you are. So don't just observe them, own those things, and make sure that you realize that's part of your core being. That's what starts the armor. This is what builds these strengths. This is what takes us forward and makes us who we are. And if we remember those moments where we realize those things, these are hints. These are little alarms, when you feel good, even in you feel good about something or you feel proud of something, that's an alarm. Your brain's saying, this is who you are. This is who you are. grab onto it and let's move forward. So that's kind of, you're fantastic, Aviva. I'm a big fan.
Well, so are
Yeah,
you. Can I just say one thing about what you said? And that
right.
is the same is true if you feel, I guess the opposite of pride is shame. And I don't mean shame, but if you feel that you're not doing something that's right,
Right.
if you feel that you are going down a path that for whatever your code may be, that you get that sense that this isn't right, I think you should pay attention to that too. And I think that that helps to build armor as well. Those are tools as well. So it's not just the bright shinies, right? It's the things that are awful and horrible. And even when you do something awful and horrible, we're human beings, we're going to do something awful and horrible at any given time. Um, but it, that will help to create who you are. And you're never too young and you're never too old, right, to find what is either good or bad and grow from that. And we're not static. And the idea that we are, that we are complete, that it's a fallacy. And there is always the opportunity for growth, but you have to, like you said, you have to pay attention to it. Both the things that give you pride and the things that give you discomfort. You
Mm-hmm.
have to pay attention to those to be able to, pick them up on your journey and grow from them.
All right. You got to live with yourself.
You do.
Yeah, you got to live with yourself, and I think that's a very good point. And sometimes we're in hard situations and we're faced with things that we know is wrong, but we feel like almost you have to do them, or you feel like you're being pushed to do them, and you have to stop and think: is this a situation where I'm going to end it and walk away? Is this a situation where I'm going to avoid this thing? And I know we're being very abstract. It could be anything, whether it
Sure.
could be bad choices with relationships, it could be drugs, it could be crime, it could be anything. But I think that that's a very good point. It's just as important as the other one, because actually, honestly, that's probably more relevant than the other one, because there's situations of people that are in bad situations and they're always having to make these choices going forward. But it is your choice, and I think that at the end, I wrote a thing about memories recently, and and it's true. I've had the honor and sad privilege of having deep conversations with people on their way out, way out of this mortal coil, or whatever you want to call it, and where we were consciously discussing, knowing that it's ending, and having a talk. And I found myself in every one of those situations having to remind people that they have value and they have made an impact in a lot of ways. It's hard, carrying that conversation, but you have to have it, because we do an inventory. I know I'm getting a little morbid, but we do an inventory in those moments, and you start looking back. And unfortunately, we tend to apply too much importance on things that are maybe have to do with financial, successes or victories in certain ways. And that happened with one of the conversations, and I had to remind the person, didn't you teach class at UNLV? There's students that are now choosing a career based on things you've said to them, that there's words you've said that are bouncing around in their heads right now. And that's a legacy. That's something that's important. That's something that shows great value. And all of us should feel lucky if we were in a situation where we could give back something like that. Everything we do, it's part of the record in your mind, whether it's not to even talking legal record, in your head. You will not forget these choices, and they'll always haunt you. And it's great if you were in a situation where, if you did the bad thing or the wrong thing or the thing that might have hurt someone, you make amends in some way through your actions, or find a way to kind of do. I know we're getting a little weird on this discussion, but it made me just think of that. And as it should. I mean, we're talking about being a lawyer, And I think that that touches on so many things.
Sure. I
And
mean, you need laws from the very beginning. You're born and a birth certificate is issued. That's a legal document.
right.
You die and a death certificate is issued.
Right.
That's a legal document. You are bookend by the law.
Yeah.
And, you know, at the risk of becoming overly sentimental, when my mom passed away, one of my sisters, who's a rabbi, did a eulogy at her funeral. And in talking about my mom, she was marvelous, but, you know, nobody would say that she made a grand splash on anything, right? She didn't win a Nobel Prize. She wasn't an author, you know, none of those sorts of things, right? But my sister had said that she tended her garden. And she wasn't a gardener, so it's completely metaphorical, right? So, but that we all have gardens that we tend, right? And sometimes they're bigger and sometimes they're smaller. But that really is what our legacy is. And if my sister watches this, I'm certain that she'll say that I got it wrong, by the way. But it is something that has stuck with me, that every interaction that we have, so the person about, you know, who you were speaking about, who taught at UNLV, whose message continued to kick around in students' minds, but every interaction that we have, really good or bad or what seems indifferent,
right.
Every interaction can make a difference, and it should make a difference. And I think that you should, like, purposefully live your life that way. So whether it's an interaction with the grocery store clerk, whether it's an interaction with, you know, the highest ranking official of whatever, it's the same thing. And that interaction, you should be purposeful with that.
That's great. I think that's a good way to end our conversation. If I think it was, you know, it was good. We ended on the law thing at the end. That was great.
Like birth certificates and death certificates. Awesome.
But you and we could talk for another hour or two. I'm
hours,
sure
hours and hours.
Yeah. But thank you so much for doing
this.
this.
Alex, thank you. Thank you for asking. I was so eager to have you ask.
Why didn't you call me?
Because it seemed so obnoxious to say, hey, don't you want to talk to me? Hey, don't you think I have something to say?
And I would say, yeah, let's do that.
I know, but you know me. That's not me. That's never me. So I was so excited when you asked. So thank you.
That's good. I hope it was what you hoped for. It's definitely what I hoped for, and more. I think I love the topics, and I think that, man, it's really falling into what I'm trying to do with this thing. So I really appreciate it.
Well, it truly was my pleasure. And I miss seeing you and hearing you and hanging out with you.
All right. Well, we'll have to figure out, as long as we're following the rules, right? There's rules. We just follow the rules.
I understand that. Those are laws, actually, right?
Right. Laws. We follow the laws, and we're being safe. And I think we're okay. But we have to figure out how to live in this situation, and we'll sort it out.
We do have to figure out how to live in this situation. I think there's so many people that are meaningfully, emotionally, psychologically, socially hurting right now. And I don't even think you can necessarily articulate what it's doing. And I think that it's not going to be until 20 years from now, when there's some sort of study on all of our remaining corpses or whatever, as to what the real effects are of, you know, living the life that we're living currently. Mm-hmm. And again, without having sort of the broader policy conversation about it, human beings are social, right? And that lack of, you know, social interaction or impairment to social interaction, it's not good for us.
Well, you have a big heart, my friend. I love you very much.
I love you too. Thanks, Alex.